Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Gabriella Callender, and welcome to today's Face-to-Face, Saturday, March 5th at 12:30. We're going to be having a panel discussion today on the Ukraine and Western media. With us today is David Andersson, journalist and author of the book The White West, A Look in the Mirror, and co-moderator from Face-to-Face. We have Dr. Partha Banerjee, writer, educator, human rights activist, and media observer. We have Medea Benjamin joining us, political activist and co-founder of Code Pink, and myself, Gabriella Callender. Welcome. Welcome, Dr. Banerjee. Welcome, David. Would please just tell us a little bit about Ukraine and Western media? Let's just get started there.
Okay. Thank you for including me in this important conversation. I just want to start off by saying this. We are all against this Russian invasion of Ukraine. We are all against the barbarism, the mass killing, the bombing. And I think that Putin is committing war crime. So let's be very clear on that. We are never, ever supporting Putin's aggression on Ukraine. But that is only a part of the story. What is being excluded from this 24/7 mainstream media discussion is, number one, the history, the background of this geopolitical situation, NATO's advancement over the years, how it slowly included practically all the former Soviet bloc countries in it, and basically how the United States military industrial complex has basically taken over NATO by being the biggest budget contributor. Those are things that are completely missing, and I call it journalism of exclusion, which is my pet term. So much is being excluded from the discussion that people are being fed with relentless pro-war propaganda and anti-Russian propaganda. It is truly propaganda in the worst form. And that is what we need to talk about, because mainstream media is excluding it from it. If you look at, for example, New York Times today, I mean, it would think that it's like a war propaganda paper, not the newspaper. There is not even an iota of any neutrality or objectivity anymore. And I had a very difficult discussion about this with some of my Columbia University Journalism School colleagues on Facebook, and it's a complete blasting of my position, even though I never, ever supported Putin's invasion of Ukraine and the violence. So that is a type of, cloud that we are living in. And whatever little power we have, we need to tell people what exactly is going on, the historical background, and the parallels between what is going on today in Ukraine and what happened before in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Cambodia, in Laos, in Guatemala, in Salvador, and throughout the world since the end of in Palestine.
Yeah.
And throughout the world since the end of World War II.
Yeah.
Every single year, the United States military industrial complex has either directly or indirectly caused war in some parts of the world.
In the Congo as well. Today we are here talking about Ukraine and the Western media. I want to welcome Medea Benjamin. Thank you so much for being here with us. Medea, please, we're just taking a moment now to actually just talk a little bit about and create conversation around Ukraine and the Western media.
Yeah. Well, one thing I notice is how NATO is suddenly the great savior, and there's a mantra repeated about NATO is a defensive organization. NATO never invaded anybody, and NATO is not an aggressor. And it is so far from the reality. And it's pretty amazing to me that people don't recognize how NATO is an aggressive organization from the time of the bombing around Yugoslavia to Afghanistan, Libya. It even participated with the US in Iraq. And those latter ones were not even countries that are bordering on NATO countries. So certainly there is a lot of propaganda in the media about NATO, and it's making it very difficult as a peace organization. Like, we have a day of action tomorrow where we're calling for Russian troops out, ceasefire, and no NATO expansion. And we're getting a lot of pushback from people on the NATO expansion, I think, because of all that media propaganda of NATO being just a defensive organization.
Mhm. Thank you. That's Medea Benjamin from Code Pink. David Andersson.
So I published a book on the issue of the White West and the culture of violence of really there is no mainstream media without wars, and there is no war without mainstream media, and we have seen Partha mentioned some of them, and I think we can see the parallel in many other places. And just a few days ago, I was at school. We had to do a mandatory workshop on boundaries, and then so you had the square, and then on one side you have the good and the good behaviors, and on the right side, on the left side, you have the bad behavior, and then you have the line in the middle. And so the story, it's how you move this line, and what do you use to move this line to be able to aggress and be able to create this behavior of being accepted along. And we have seen with Trump, we have seen with many situations where the media are pushing the limits of that line so it become acceptable. And that's what has been doing NATO for the last 15 years. We have been getting countries after country from the ex-USS bloc, and Russia has been warming and telling them, don't cross this red line. Please don't underestimate the difficulties and the problem of crossing this red line. And so this is where we are today. And I think for anybody who has been seeing the process, what happened for the last 15 years, the situation in Ukraine is not a surprise, and it's sad. And Europe has not been built for that. The problem is you cannot have Europe and the European community, and on top of it, having a NATO war institution who makes the call. And I think for my friend European, they need to understand that the US is not interested in the European community. At the reverse, the US want to have it shut down as much as possible, because he will overpower his own economical power. So I think this is where we are now. This is what is the situation, and I think the media play a role, and then Partha mentioned it. I mean, when we saw how they deal with the people who are against the vaccine, who were less than 50% of the population, and we end up controlling everything, and the protests in Canada have been showing the extreme of treating something as pushing for a vaccine to become some kind of dictatorship. So I think we are there.
Yeah. And as we're talking about the media and Ukraine, and you mentioned the vaccine, what I'm hearing really all of you say is there is this strong suggestion that's almost like a demand, and it gets planted into the seed of our psyches through the media. And then if we don't do it, then we're going to look bad. It's going to get to the very root of our human behavior of not wanting to look bad. So even if you have the vaccine like myself, but believe that people should have the freedom to choose, and you say that, it looks bad. If I say, yes, it's sad for the Ukrainians, but what about the Palestinians? It looks bad. How does the media play a role in this?
Yes. So basically, I think we have all seen some of the news reports coming out of ABC and CNN and BBC and all these major outlets where journalist after journalist, like these are big name journalists, men and women, they're basically talking racism. I mean, they're like taking a very racist position that, look, these Ukrainians, I mean, they are blue-eyed and blonde-haired people, I mean, they are being attacked. They're not like some godforsaken Iraqis or Syrians or Libyans or Somalians or Palestinians, and they didn't even mention Palestine. But that is the mindset. I have worked with the mainstream media. I went to like one of the most mainstream journalism schools, and I have faced this all along. When I brought over Noam Chomsky for a speech at my school, there out of 350 journalism students, maybe 100 showed up, because the others, they did not think that Chomsky was important at all. So that is the mindset. So there is absolutely, we are calling ourselves a democracy here in the United States. We are calling ourselves a land of freedom and free speech and all that. But then if you really look deeper, and nobody wants to take, I mean, not nobody, but almost nobody wants to take the time to look deeper, go down the layers, that there is an absolute dictatorship which is so invisible and so subtle that we do not even call it dictatorship, or we do not even call it censorship, because it is happening so beautifully and so silently. And that is that if you take a position that is out of the box, like Chomsky himself said, that the democracy here is like looking through a tunnel vision. There is fierce, vibrant debate within that tunnel, but there is nothing beyond the tunnel. You don't even get to see it.
Yeah.
So that is how it is being done. So that is why we are seeing and hearing all these reports coming out of Ukraine that is completely biased and completely one-sided. Not that the atrocities are not happening, and like I said before, in unequivocally condemning that, but there is an absolute vacuum. There is no discussion on history. There is no parallels being brought in. There is no conversation on Iraq, what happened in Iraq. There is no conversation of Vietnam. There is no conversation on Palestine or any other place. The genocide in Bangladesh that was perpetrated by Kissinger and CIA, big time.
Well, when we're saying
300,000 women were gang raped in Bangladesh in 1971. Nobody even knows, let alone talking about it.
I mean, when we listen to like a Democracy Now! Or BAR, or public access radio, or face-to-face, we find out that way. Vonderoni asks, why are we allowing Fox News to play on every U.S. military base, right? I know when I went for court duty, Fox News was playing in the lobby area. Who makes those decisions, and is that strategic? Medea, please, or David, is that strategic? Who makes those decisions to have Fox News play on every U.S. military base?
It's a good question. And it's terrible. You already have the indoctrination of people in the military saying that we have the greatest military in the world when they can't even win any wars. And then on top of that, to be indoctrinating them with a right-wing media is terrible. And I have been in situations where, I go in and Fox News is on and I ask, why is it on, or can you change this? But let's face it, the cable news are all biased. So you're going to get it from one side, or you're going to get it from the other side.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And yeah, Medea is so right. I mean, that is, and I have actually seen that happening all over the world. This is not just happening here in the United States. This is a media model that is being copied and used all over the world. And I can tell you from my very deep experience on the Indian situation, India is now being run by, like a Hindu version of white supremacists. And these are the same people that killed Mahatma Gandhi. And what is the bigger irony than the same people being in the power of India? I mean, that's like unbelievable, but this is happening right in front of our eyes. So just like, I'm just giving you a parallel, and then I'll let David talk about it. Like Trump did not allow any journalist from any other media organizations during his 4 years, and he did not have any press conference or anything like that. Only Fox was allowed. Okay, just the same way Modi has not done a single press conference during his almost 10 years of rule, and the only journalists that he invited for any media discussion were people that he handpicked, far right-wing media. So this is a media model. This is happening all over the world. And I mean, if you talk about Zelensky, I mean, he went to bed with some fascist neo-Nazi people, and then that discussion is simply absent from New York Times or CNN or any other media sources, let alone Fox.
But even to call the situation in Ukraine as a war, if you ask a general from ex-general from Ukraine, and you say if Russia wanted, they could kill between 50 and 20,000 people a day if they were using weapon of
God
war
forbid.
weapon. And right now, as yesterday, we had 752 civilian casualty and 227 killed. So this what happened in Ukraine is in some ways it's not a full-scale war as the media should describe it and should explain. So it's like preparing the situation for psychological pushing the line that I was talking at the beginning, so it become something where part of and we accept the situation in some way. So it's really the media have a lot of role to play on the scale, and every day who's passing by, of course, the situation is going to become more and more complicated because the discussion doesn't start. The Europe and NATO cannot accept any negotiation. It has no possible of diplomacy because of a fixed point of view of we are not going to move. We want to be able to expand without limits. And it's the same at the economical level with the concentration of money. It's the same with climate change. We are not going to do anything to change the direction of the climate change. And it was flood in Germany, it was flood in Belgium, it was flood all over, but nothing is going to be really happening to make any scale, any change. And the media are very complicit to all of this because they don't put the people who are responsible of the situation into their situation, into their real discussion.
I want to make a clear distinction when we say media, what we mean, because we are, after all, inside of media, right? So when we're talking about media, is it safe to assume we are talking about mainstream media?
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah, not just mainstream, but corporate media that is funded by corporations, either directly owned or funded by corporations in such a way that either they're directly, for example, when I talk to my labor union students, how many of you know that ESPN, the sports channel, is actually owned by ABC, that is owned by Disney? Okay, like there are a very, very few hands going up. People simply have no idea. So it is no wonder, I mean, I don't want to stray too much, but like selling the war is like selling a bag of potato chips. You make it look cool and shiny and glitzy and beautiful. And you look at American media, Hollywood, and they are cloned Bollywood, and like there's like so many beautiful quote unquote war movies where nobody really gets killed that way, nobody is decapitated, no blood is gushing out, there is no grotesque violence, and it's like all beautiful, and people's minds are completely taken over by the justification side of war and violence, let alone guns that are so rampant in this country, all over the country. So I mean, this is a discussion that should happen more often, not the New York Times or CNN way, where it is all happening in a vacuum and in the present time without any historical context.
Yes, and can I add there about how this war is being covered so intensely, and yet at the same time there is the war going on in Yemen, and we just did a protest outside of CNN saying, cover Yemen, tell us what's going on there, show us a war that's been going on for 7 years,
Right.
where the US has been giving billions of dollars worth of weapons to the Saudis. Even Biden, who says he's not going to do that anymore, has been doing it. And yet the American people don't even know that war is going on.
Yeah, and I would just dare say there's a direct link. I would make a hypothesis, and there's actually numbers to show it, that there's a direct link to the war that goes on out in the world and the war that goes on in our own homes, in terms of sexual violation, inside of patriarchy, inside of white supremacy, and its impact on our own homes. What I'm hearing you all speak to is a stimuli, that we're constantly being subjected to a stimuli. And to the level of which it impacts us is not the level to which we actually deal with it or converse about it, right? We talk about other stimuli. If I were to have a heart attack or something, that's on the table to talk about. But what we have daily, advertisements in our face, commercials in the background, medical commercials, all of that. What I hear you saying, Dr. Partha Banerjee and Medea Benjamin and David Andersson, is that that's all a part of a strategic plan to gear our minds to think a certain way and then take corresponding actions. Am I hearing that correctly, or can you elaborate? Or
we are born. This is our whole concept of our own society. Even the U.S. of the American foundation is based on war. I mean, the notion you have no society who can be developed in a West who is not based in violence, and we are not recognizing the violence. We don't even know the violence. If you ask people, do you see any economical violence, they're going to say, oh, no, I don't see it. Yeah, it's an economical system. It's normal. It's so that's really what struck me the most. It's how we are a little bit and sensitive to that notion of how we treat the indigenous community. How do we treat our environment? How do we treat our economical system, and how we treat our distribution? This is the same way that we are treating other country, and the situation is today with Ukraine, but it's going to be with other country tomorrow. I mean, don't the same war is happening with China right now. It's on the same direction, with the same way of the same element, with the same techniques. So we have to change our culture. We have to do something at the cultural level where the values have to change. How do we need to change our own landscape of what is good and what is bad, and where is the left, where is the right, and move the line back to a more human scale society.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. How important is Twitter and Instagram and social media in moving beyond the barriers of mainstream media? And how effective has it been? I mean, I can come up with the example, talk about Egypt a little bit, but I want to hear from each of you. What are some of the things that have been happening that are beyond the scope of Western media that actually have had a positive impact?
Well, I know in the organizing work that I do, Twitter has been very, very useful. We all know how social media can be a terrible spreader of disinformation, but it also can have a positive impact. When we want to mobilize people, like on our Action Tomorrow, we get out on Twitter and other forms of social media to say, come on, join us in the streets. When there's something that happens that we haven't been planning for, and we have to get people out quickly, it's a way to do that. It's also a way to really learn what's happening at the moment. And if you have people that you trust, that you follow on Twitter, you're more likely to believe what they put out than things that you might hear in the mainstream media. So if used right, it can be both an important source of information and an important source for educating and mobilizing people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I just might want to add that this, again, this is a globalized world, and everything and every place is so integrally connected to each other that you cannot overlook what's happening in Ukraine today, and what happened in Iraq yesterday, or what's happening in other parts of the world right now. Medea just talked about Yemen, and so many different things are happening: genocides, starvation, deaths happening all over the world. And where is that discussion? For example, whenever this, and this happened in India, again, from my personal experience, like the second time Modi and this, bigoted group got elected back in 2019, that was entirely done on the Kashmir issue, and killing of some 50 Indian soldiers by a terrorist attack. No investigation was ever undertaken to find out who was behind the attack and all that. But regardless, there was a huge ultra-nationalistic sentiment that was whipped up just before the election, and that helped them to win an even bigger mandate. Likewise, if you look at what's happening in Ukraine, in the middle of all this very conflicting and turbulent discussions, like the COVID discussion is completely absent. The fact that almost 1 million people now have died. I looked at the number today, and it's like 985,000 people. So 15,000 short of reaching 1 million target. I don't know if that's a target, but that is the real situation. The healthcare is completely falling apart. The prison situation. The United States is a country where 1 out of every 4 prisoners remains in jail, in private prison industrial complex. They sell their stocks on the stock market. So I bring up these issues. I have taught, this IBW Local 3 for 14 seasons, and they were like, how come we never heard about this on media? I said, because you are glued to Fox. You leave my classroom and then sit in front of Fox. So what else do you learn? So there is the real challenge, as I have mentioned before, is before we began the discussion live, is that the real challenge is to find a way to make people or give them the instruments or the willingness, the inspiration to learn something, to earn their knowledge, not just sit in front of mainstream media and then get stuff that they're spewing 24/7. That is really the biggest challenge. How to make people eager to learn, how to make people go beyond the box and learn some that is truly important, that is truly bread and butter issues to my life. And then how do we actually cut through the clutter that mainstream media has created for a very, very long time, so that there is a little bit of a ray of hope for the future generation, that they will learn about substantive issues, whether it's healthcare, whether it is racism, whether it is climate change, whether it is income inequality, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
But to go back a little bit to the questions, I think Medea and Kunping, I think they are doing fantastic job on the social media, and I think people like Chomsky are doing very good job. I mean, you have a couple of people who really know how to take advantage of the situation to really put the point across. And I think for the rest, we still need to learn a lot about how does it work and how can we really get. So I think it's also a training and learning process for the majority of people to be able to be effective on that medium.
Can we actually learn that inside of capitalist system in the public school systems within a capitalist system? In other words, do we learn as children here in the States how to cross-reference information, how to be able to question things, how to be able to question authority? Doesn't it begin there, the wanting to see the many different perspectives and not just the one? And how does being a Lockheed kid affect the amount of television that you see? And how do your parents' economic situation actually impact that really what you have is just your TV because everyone's rushing to survive? Where do we begin with this?
David,
I want all the answers from you.
All right, so let me
right
be
here,
very
right
quick.
now.
very quick. I think we need to go back to Partha. It's mentioned about dictatorship, and I think our dictatorship is about money, and our freedom it's absolutely controlled by us be able to make money, to think about money, to spend money. Who are to which restaurant do we want to go? Do we want Peruvian or Chinese or the color of our hair to burn it? But doesn't go beyond that. So the school, it's part of that story. And I think for the parents, what they want the most is for their kids to be able to find work and to make money. So until that notion of that dictatorship, that's priority, that's a main objective in life doesn't change, I think it will be very complicated to ask questions. Why are we going to questions? And I'm volunteer for the last 30 or 45 years of my life, and people are like, why are you volunteer? Why are you doing all of this? I mean, what is there for you? So I think until I know what is there for me, but I don't think people understand what is there for them. That's a problem of it.
Yeah, David knows this very well because I worked so closely with him for many years. When I left my scientist career and went back to school when I was 42 years old, and then started working as a post 9/11 grassroots community organizer out of a rat hole in Jackson Heights. My wife thought I was crazy. I don't even have to talk about other people. She thought that I was never going to make a career in this, humanitarian work. This is all, like a utopian dream and, wishful thinking and whatnot. And that is something that, many people actually are doing, and especially young generation. Many young generation people are on the street. If you look at the nationwide movement on George Floyd and police brutality, millions and millions of young kids came out on the street. I mean, it is like a historical movement. If you look at the movement against gun violence at schools, so many young people are coming out on the street. So, women's rights movement, climate movement, this like 16-year-old kid from Sweden, and she has like stirred up the entire world.
Greta is great.
So I have a lot of hope, not necessarily for my gray-haired generation, but definitely for the younger people. They are really showing us a way how to do it within a social democratic, capitalistic framework. You don't have to be a communist to do that. I have lots of respect and hope for them.
And Medea, what say you about all of that? Huh?
Well, there are so many issues that we've just brought up. I agree that there's a lot of inspiration of watching young people take to the streets and organize on so many of these different issues. Unfortunately, against war, it has been quite hard to get people mobilizing. And even now, while there are some people coming out that have our line of no Russian troops, but also criticizing NATO, the majority are people who are from Ukraine, and I understand their point of view, but it tends to be, we want NATO intervention, we want more weapons. And I think because as we've been talking of all the propaganda that we hear on the news, it is hard for people to understand that you have to know the history of how we got here to really have an idea of where the solution would lie, and that is compromises that have to be made at the negotiating table. And so I'm saying all of this because it has been very difficult, even way before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, to build up a mass movement against the wars that the Western countries have been waging. And I think while we know how strong the fossil fuel industry is and the pharmaceutical industry is, this military, industrial, congressional, security, university complex is so enormous that it's very hard to break through that and get people to understand that whether their issue is around the environment, they have to recognize the Pentagon is the largest polluter in the world. If their issue is about student debt, well, where's the money going to come from? How about the Pentagon pot? Or if your issue is about don't we deserve a healthcare system that actually takes care of us, we have to look at where we're spending our money. So I feel very frustrated that it is so difficult to break into that. And even the progressives who get elected in the US Congress, they understand that their constituents care much more about domestic issues than they do about foreign policy issues. So why get yourself into big trouble doing something like criticizing Israel or going up against the Pentagon budget when it is not something that the majority of your constituents really care about?
And I want to continue on what Medea is saying, because you have people who have done it. And John Lennon stand and asked to give a piece of chance, and he was killed on this sidewalk in front of this house. You have people like Martin Luther King, who did stand against discrimination and also against the war in Vietnam, and he was killed in front of this hotel. And you have people like Kennedy, who was maybe a little bit a pro against war president, and who was killed on live TV. So I think we really need to think deep. How can we change that structure of violence? Because if we are not taking responsibility for what's going on in Ukraine today, it's going to be very complicated to move forward and to get peace, because the structure of peace doesn't exist. And I think that's what has to be built. And you have many things. We have opportunity like the ban treaty on nuclear weapons. It's an opportunity for the world to take and for the European country to sign. But they need to do it. They need to get out of NATO, or they need to transform NATO to a humanitarian organization. What happened with the Guard here in the US during the COVID, where they end up building hospital, helping with vaccine. So we can transform the situation, but we need to be very clear of what we don't want. And if we don't want violence, we need to recognize it and be really looking for other alternatives.
Yeah. I just want to say, David, that it's become 1,000 times harder because of the invasion of Ukraine than it was. And it was even so difficult before that, because now people are, well, Congress and the White House are already asking for more money for the Pentagon. Germany has already, I think, increased its military budget by 50%. The European countries are suddenly agreeing that, yes, they have to put more money into their military. We are going in the exact opposite direction of what we as a human species and those who want life to continue on this planet should be doing. And I think that we're going to have to be dealing with this for a long time to come.
I agree, Benjamin. But we are not the center of the world. We are not controlling everything. And this is the world we are living in. It's one and multiple on the same time. So how far we're going to be able to maintain that structure, it's not clear. It's not clear. And things are really moving, I think, faster than what we want to faster in some ways. The conflict of Ukraine, it's one of the expression of a new world order which starting to be born. And I think it's going to be some readjustment for the West to be able to maintain the situation.
You know what I heard, David, what I heard in what you said is really, and what I heard in what you said, Dr. Banerjee, is there's something that comes inside of you that makes you say, hey, what's going to be my place in this? What am I then going to do? And that's really what we have to look, right? When I think of violence in the world, the first thing that I think of is I think of the Congo, where women are raped and thrown in the ditch every 12 minutes. To me, there's no place that's worse than there. We don't talk about that. When I think of violence in the world, I think of all the young girls and boys who are touched the wrong way in their homes. But we don't talk much about that. But when I hear, okay, what can we do? This is a thing. This is a human condition. What do we do? Well, we can talk about Twitter and we can talk about, right, all of these outside of the box things. And we could do all of those out of the box things. Yeah. But are we able to handle one of it and not all of it?
Yeah.
Is it actually possible is what I want to know. Is peace in Palestine, Congo, Ukraine, in our homes? Is it possible? And what's the one thing you want to leave your audience with today?
Yeah. Well, if I may take this opportunity to answer, you are so right that not all of us can do all of it, but we can definitely answer to our inner calling and do one thing. If your thing is women's issue, if that when you wake up in the morning, if that comes to your mind first, then you work on that. Medea and Brooklyn for Peace, that I have known for many years, they are doing wonderful work against war and violence, and my hats off to them. They do that. David Andersson does so many things, but I know that he's like deeply involved with the immigrant rights movement. I'm a first generation immigrant. I never spoke English in my life before I came to America as a foreign student. So my heart is there also. So we can do our own things. But at the end of the day, we need to find a way to talk to each other and create some kind of a solidarity, some type of an alliance, some type of, and let's forget about this so-called left-right divide. Because at the end of the day, common people's, ordinary working class people's issues are so similar. I mean, we definitely have differences, but the similarities are overwhelming. The issues are so strikingly similar. We must find a way so that we can, when I worked with the immigrant rights groups, I actually gave them a proposal that let's build a coalition, which we did back in those days against hate crimes on immigrants after 9/11. And we told them, look, we all have our own things, our silos. We are all overwhelmed and we have so little budget. We run on shoestring budgets. But can we find a way so that we sit down with other groups from other movements and create a sense of solidarity so that we are not alone? And let's allocate maybe 5% of our budget for this alliance building so that we can all like pool in our resources and build something together. Unless we do that, we are all like, I'm working on, racism issue. I couldn't care less about the war. Like somebody already said that it's domestic issues take precedence over international issues. Okay. So because that is how we have been taught, that you only think about your issue, and there is no connection between your issue and their issue. This is all like separate and exclusive of each other, when they're also integrally associated. And I'm going to leave by saying this. Chomsky has pointed out many times that there are two existentialist crises that we are faced with. One is a climate crisis, which is going to destroy the world very soon if we don't do anything right now. And the second is a nuclear war possibility, God forbid. So, which is right in front of our eyes right now. I mean, human civilization might cease to exist. So think about that, and then let's move forward with more discussions in the future.
Thank you, Dr.
Well,
Partha Banerjee. Yes.
I came across, I think, as quite negative about what we're facing now with increased militarism. But David, you're right. The possibilities, we don't know. They could suddenly open up. And every day I'm getting people saying, why don't we have a nonviolent peace force that surrounds Ukraine and marches in? Why don't we, what more can we do to show solidarity with the people in Russia who are standing up despite the repression when they say no to war? And we have created this global network that has been building up. And tomorrow we have people who will be protesting in Japan, Korea, Australia, all throughout Europe, Canada. And they are with that message of not only the Russian troops out, but also no expansion of NATO, and a larger message of we have to end war and end militarism. So when people do see that nuclear annihilation is so much closer than they ever thought it could be, when they see nuclear power plants that could become, that are like ticking time bombs, maybe there is a new consciousness that is being raised among many millions of people. And this is a time, the one little silver lining, a time for us to make those global connections, be in solidarity with people inside Ukraine, inside Russia, and build a real movement to say that as soon as this immediate crisis is over, we have to get serious about the UN Treaty for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. We have to get serious about the institutions that we've created, like the UN, and make them function in a much better way without the veto power by the countries themselves, whether it's the US or Russia, that can nix any kind of global joint actions. So anyway, the point is just to say that we are open for any possibilities that arise as a result of this crisis.
And,
Thank you.
and just to go on the line of Medea, I think, and here it's how start a peace process. Everywhere we have seen a peace process started. You could be in Colombia, we could be in South America, in South Africa, or anywhere else. First, you need to have the two sides who agree, then the violence will not resolve the issue. It's the first point of everything on that notion of peace. It's you have to agree, then violence, you are at the road of violence, and the violence will not resolve this issue. Until you get to that point, nothing can really be transformed. And so I think we need to have the responsibility to ask for peace, but really pressure our institutions to really promote, then violence will not resolve this issue. And the Ukraine and Europe cannot keep having this structure of military. I mean, I pay taxes, and 60% of my taxes go directly to the military complex. Every American who are not a big corporation pay taxes who go mainly to military structure and weapons and so on and so forth. So until we, as Americans or as Europeans, say, no, we don't want to pay these taxes, we should have the freedom to be able to say where our taxes goes. We should have the freedom to be able to say, then we are not interested to have taxes being used for killing people. But it needs to be a large movement, as Partha said. And I think in my life, and I think my experience is, if we could spend 2 hours a day to be volunteer and do something for no money, but for causes we are really connected to and want to fight to, this is where freedom starts. This is where, and you're going to see how limited you're going to. I can give you an example in Long Island. You have an organization who try to give food for people who are with no work, who were affected by the COVID and so on and so forth. When they go to the square in Long Island, they got call from the community and the police has to come because the people who are coming to that community are not people who are not good people. So this is where the problem is as soon as you start to do something interesting who could help, you're going to have the system who's going to tell you, no, sorry, but you cannot do it here. You need to go somewhere else in very short. So really, this is really important to understand what freedom are we talking about and how our life has consequences who could change our structure.
Do we have any questions in the chat? So I don't think we have any questions.
Yes,
today.
we do. But we have a couple of comments.
Oh, I do. Oh, here we go. Oh, yeah. Here we go.
So, like I can show you this one. It's and I think we cover a little bit, but it was a huge missing. We have into the dictatorship of education.
Very true. Very true. That is something that we definitely need to talk about because. Like what is education anyways? I mean, one type of education is just, the way we were taught in India, given that we had some excellent teachers and everything. But basically it's a system that is learning by rote. You are asked to learn something, memorize something and regurgitate it like at the exam. That is one, and then follow the rec. That is one type of education. And the other type of education is to question, to challenge, to analyze. That is the real essence of education. But that is not what we see even here in the United States in the midst of all these brilliant students and educational institutions. So definitely Desiree has a very, very important point that we need to look at the educational system and overhaul it. And again, that has to come from the younger people.
We have another one. You want to about RT news being blocked and it happened in Instagram where they blocked. Instagram was blocked in the US. RT news was blocked in Instagram, who's supposed to be independent in the US yesterday. I tried to publish a couple of videos and was not able to do it.
Yes, I'd like to speak to that because during this invasion, I actually really thought it was important to go to RT and see what was being said on there. I got a chance to hear directly Putin's speeches, and I was actually surprised at the number of critical voices that were on RT. I was on an RT show on Friday, right before RT America was shut down. And when they invited me on, I said, well, I'm going to be very critical of this, horrific invasion. And they said, please do. And we had a very frank, open discussion with zero censorship. And yet now the US will not allow that to be on the air. So I think it's actually quite ironic that at a time when we are critical, and rightly so, of a lot of censorship going on in Russia right now, that we too are censoring another voice that should be available for people to see and make their own judgments.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, on a free speech country, yeah, that should be. that should be.
But
And
I
not
think
only are they shutting down RT, they're shutting down other voices and people who had programs on RT that were very independent programs, but were leftist ones, like Lee Camp and his Redacted Tonight, and programs on radio programs on Sputnik. All of these have now been canceled. And yes, it is you don't yes, in a country that prides itself on free speech, it is a terrible example of making sure that, and we're saying wartime, war is not even happening on our soil. And we are not experiencing that war. We should be able to hear all sides in this.
and Medea is so right. It's not just happening with RT musicians and dancers and football players and all these performing artists. They're being banned from performing, just because they're from Russia. It's just like unbelievable.
And I want to make a point on that, which is that we have been at Code Pink have been part of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement around Israel and face tremendous backlash, including legislation in many of our states making it illegal to boycott Israel. And yet now we have this huge boycott against Russia and Russians. And we would always make the distinction. If there was an artist who is from Israel just doing their own concerts, we wouldn't say boycott that. If they were sponsored by the Israeli government, we would say yes. And yet those kind of distinctions are not being made now when they're taking individual artists from Israel and boycotting them. That's just terrible. And that's creating a lot of hatred against not just Putin, but the Russian people.
Yeah, and then it reminds us of the Chinese Exclusion Act, and reminds us of the Japanese internment camp after Pearl Harbor. So history comes back. But see, if you can, like I said, journalism of exclusion, if you can completely eliminate that from human awareness and consciousness, that then basically, you have taken over their minds, and you don't really have to have all out censorship the Soviet or Chinese way.
And how can you have label so-called media or newspaper calling RT a propaganda machine from the Russian government because they are financed by, when the BBC is all financed by the British government? I mean, the BBC, it's a pure propaganda machine of the. So we cannot have these two standards. On one case, it's a good press freedom, and the other case, it's a propaganda machine from a government.
Yeah, it's a clear case of hypocrisy and double standards, and most unfortunately, Americans or Indians that I know very closely do not even understand how all pervasive and overwhelming it is.
Mm-hmm.
But they can study it. We have school for that. We have university for that. We have a lot of things in the structure who should be able to help people to understand the standard and what it means to do something like this. It's manipulation, it's propaganda at a very low level. So
manufacturing consent.
Yeah.
Yes, manufacturing consent. For those just joining us, this is Face to Face. We're having a dialogue about Ukraine in the Western media. Dr. Partha Banerjee, Medea Benjamin, David Andersson, and myself, Gabriella Callender. A shout out to Ibrahim Ali, who asked the question about banning Russian television of the Black Celts. He's actually going to be with us on St. Paddy's Day, talking about the Black Celts on March 17th. And speaking of education, Dr. Sandra McGuire will be with us on March 11th, talking about how to teach your children. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Very good.
All right. So we're wrapping it up today. And I just want to say my name is Gabriella Callender, also Amazi Azul Azmi. Here's my stand and here's my bucket. Black and brown women's voices, front and center. All of humanity is included and no one is left out. Thanks for joining us on Face to Face, and come again soon.